What happens when a joke crosses a line that was never meant to be crossed? What happens when a legendary athlete feels his legacy being measured by someone who has never swung a club for a living? And what happens when a late-night host decides to press harder than expected on a topic that has divided fans for decades? On this imagined night, the studio lights feel hotter than usual. The audience energy is not the relaxed laughter of a routine celebrity interview. It is curiosity, tension, and something sharper beneath the applause. Earlier in the week, John Daly left Tiger Woods off his personal Mount Rushmore of golf. The sports world reacted immediately. Comment sections ignited. Analysts debated legacy. Fans felt insulted. Others defended the opinion as honest and overdue. Jimmy Kimmel's team sensed the moment. It was trending. It was emotional. It had nostalgia and rivalry woven into it. And so the booking was made. John Daly walks out to a mix of cheers and murmurs. The audience is older. Many grew up watching both him and Tiger dominate headlines in completely different ways. There is respect in the room. But there is also anticipation. The opening minutes, stay safe, light banter. Career highlights. Stories from tournaments long past. The kind of rhythm viewers expect from a late-night appearance. The host smiles. The guest smiles back. The audience relaxes. But underneath the rhythm, there is a shift. The Tiger question lingers like a weight that has not yet dropped. Why leave him off the list? Was it strategy? Was it pride? Was it resentment from a different era of golf? Or was it simply honesty? Jimmy leans forward slightly. The tone changes almost imperceptibly. The room senses it before the words land. The laughter fades quicker than usual. The crowd stops anticipating a punchline and starts anticipating friction. The conversation moves toward legacy, then toward respect, then toward influence. Jimmy does not attack, but he presses. He frames the omission not as opinion, but as something that feels dismissive. Something that sounds like history being rewritten. John Daly's posture shifts. He is not smiling now. Not offended. Not yet. But alert. He has always been comfortable being blunt. He has never been comfortable being cornered. The audience begins to feel the temperature rise. A few scattered claps break out, unsure which direction to take. Jimmy continues, suggesting that leaving Tiger off a greatest of all time list sounds less like preference and more like personal bias. It is subtle, but it lands. There it is. The first spark. A faint ripple of tension runs through the crowd. Some nod in agreement with the host. Others stiffen in defense of the guest. Jimmy pushes once more, not loudly, not aggressively, but firmly. He suggests that maybe ego plays a part in these lists. That perhaps legends do not like being overshadowed. The air changes instantly. John Daly does not laugh. He does not deflect. He looks directly at the host, and for the first time that night, the room feels like it has stepped out of comedy and into something far more real. The audience senses that the conversation has crossed from playful to personal, and in that exact moment, before anyone fully understands what is about to unfold, the imagined confrontation truly begins. The silence that followed the first spark did not feel accidental. It felt deliberate. John Daly did not rush to defend himself. He let the weight of the question hang in the studio, as if he wanted the audience to sit with it. The energy shifted from light entertainment to something slower and more charged. The host still wore the practiced grin, but it no longer felt effortless. Jimmy leaned in and suggested that leaving Tiger Woods off a greatest list did not just look like opinion. It looked personal. The implication lingered. Was it rivalry? Was it resentment? Was it pride? Daly's posture straightened. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger yet, but in calculation. He calmly reminded the room that a personal Mount Rushmore is not a court verdict, it is preference. He made it clear that no one owns the definition of greatness. The audience reacted with scattered applause. Jimmy pressed further. He framed the omission as something that fans might interpret as disrespect. He pointed out how Tiger changed the sport, how viewership exploded, how sponsorships multiplied. He asked whether leaving him out ignored undeniable impact. Daly did not smile this time. He leaned toward the desk and countered, by implying that legacy is more than television ratings. He pointed toward grit, toward influence inside the locker room, toward the players who inspired peers rather than audiences. The line was subtle, but the message was not. There are different ways to define greatness. The crowd hummed with approval from one side, hesitation from the other. Jimmy pivoted, suggesting that perhaps ego plays a role in these lists. He implied that legends sometimes resist acknowledging newer icons. It was delivered lightly, but it landed heavy. Daly's jaw tightened. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. Instead, he said calmly that he had earned the right to have an opinion without being psychoanalyzed on television. The tone was firm, controlled, but edged. The studio grew quiet. Jimmy attempted humor, brushing it off as friendly debate. He reminded Daly that this is late-night television, not a courtroom. The line drew nervous laughter. Daly responded with a sharper edge. He suggested that sometimes late-night hosts confuse jokes with judgment, that the desk does not make someone an authority on careers built on sweat and pressure. The audience gasped, then clapped. Jimmy's smile flickered. He leaned forward again, voice steady, and pointed out that public figures have to accept public scrutiny. He suggested that if Daly wanted to stir debate, he should not be surprised when debate shows up. That was the moment the temperature rose. Daly fired back, not angrily, but pointedly, saying that stirring debate is different from being cornered for a viral clip. He implied that the host knew exactly what he was doing, pushing for a headline rather than a conversation. The energy shifted palpably. A section of the audience began cheering Daly. Another section stayed loyal to the host. The divide was visible now. Jimmy tried to regain rhythm, saying the show was simply reflecting what fans were already asking. Daly responded that sometimes fans are fed what to ask. The exchange stopped feeling like banter. It felt like two men refusing to give ground. Jimmy pressed one final time in this stretch, suggesting that leaving Tiger off a list of legends risks sounding like denial. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Daly leaned back, eyes locked on the host, and delivered a calm but cutting remark that implied the only denial in the room was pretending this was still a friendly interview. The crowd erupted. Not laughter, not applause. Reaction. The air was electric, and as the applause and murmurs settled into a charged stillness, both men understood that this was no longer about Tiger Woods. It had become about pride. Pride is a dangerous fuel on live television. The energy in the room had shifted from curiosity to tension, and neither man seemed willing to retreat. Jimmy Kimmel adjusted in his chair, posture firm now, no longer leaning back casually. He had lost the rhythm of the bit and found himself in something far less predictable. His tone sharpened, though he still wrapped it in the cadence of comedy. He suggested that perhaps what Daly really resented was not Tiger Woods, but the way the spotlight moved. He implied that eras change, heroes shift, and some legends struggle when the narrative no longer centers around them. It was not loud. It was not shouted, but it cut. The audience reacted immediately, a mix of stunned silence and nervous laughter. That line had weight. Daly did not flinch outwardly, but the shift was visible in his expression. His eyes hardened. The relaxed swagger was gone. He leaned forward slowly, resting his forearms on his knees, the body language of someone preparing to respond with intent. He calmly reminded the room that he had never chased the spotlight, and never needed it to validate his career. He suggested that some people measure greatness by headlines and sponsorships, while others measure it by the respect earned from peers who actually compete. The implication hung in the air: respect from players versus praise from television. Jimmy attempted to interrupt lightly, but Daly continued, firm and composed. He pointed out that it is easy to glorify legacies from behind a desk, far from the pressure of a tournament where one mistake lives forever. It was not an insult, it was a reality check. The room shifted again. Jimmy straightened. He pushed back harder now, saying that Tiger Woods transcended the sport in ways few ever had. He suggested that leaving him off a greatest list feels like ignoring history. He added that sometimes bluntness is not bravery. It is ego disguised as honesty. That was the first moment the audience audibly reacted as a group. A collective inhale. Daly's expression changed from controlled to unmistakably irritated. He leaned in closer, eyes locked with the host, and responded with a calm but direct observation that perhaps ego is more common in rooms with applause buttons than on fairways. The remark drew a sharp reaction from the crowd. Some cheered, others groaned. Jimmy's composure wavered for the first time. He attempted to pivot toward humor again, but it landed awkwardly. The joke did not carry. The audience was no longer waiting for punchlines. They were watching a contest of control. Daly sensed it. He pressed forward, saying that Tiger's legacy does not need protection from television, and that defending it this aggressively says more about the host than the player. He suggested that this segment felt less like discussion and more like bait. The word bait lingered. Jimmy's jaw tightened slightly. He fired back, suggesting that if Daly could not handle pushback, perhaps the original comment was made for attention rather than authenticity. The line was direct. The gloves were off. The audience noise rose again, louder now, divided and energized. The cameras cut to faces in the crowd, some stunned, some thrilled. The tension had reached a visible peak. Daly did not raise his voice. Instead, he slowed down, which made it more powerful. He calmly pointed out that attention is something the host understands well, and that stirring controversy is part of the show's formula. He implied that questioning a personal opinion while sitting under studio lights is a safe kind of courage. The room fell into a heavy silence. For a moment, Jimmy looked less like a comedian and more like a man being challenged on his own stage. And then something shifted in Daly's demeanor. He was no longer defensive, he was confident. And what he did next would change the balance of the entire night. The confidence shift was not theatrical, it was calculated. John Daly did not raise his voice. He did not posture. Instead, he did something far more destabilizing for a late-night host. He stopped reacting and started controlling the direction of the conversation. He turned the focus away from TigerWoods entirely and toward the framing of the segment itself. He pointed out that the show had promoted his appearance with graphics highlighting the so-called snub. That social media teasers emphasized controversy rather than nuance. That the topic was packaged long before he walked on stage. He suggested that the outrage did not originate with him. It originated with how it was presented. The audience murmured. Because they knew he was not wrong. Jimmy attempted to interject, insisting that the show simply reflected public reaction. Daly calmly countered by suggesting that reaction is often amplified by those who benefit from it. The line did not feel like an attack. It felt like exposure. The host's usual rhythm was gone. There was no punchline to hide behind. Daly continued, explaining that leaving TigerWoods off a personal list was not an insult. It was a preference rooted in a different definition of greatness. He spoke about discipline, resilience, locker room respect. The quiet grind that does not always translate into ratings or headlines. He made it clear that greatness is layered, and that reducing it to universal agreement ignores the individuality of experience. Jimmy pushed back, questioning whether such an omission unintentionally diminishes what Tiger accomplished. Daly responded that no television debate has the power to diminish a career built over decades. He suggested that the assumption that Tiger requires constant defense reveals insecurity in the narrative, not in the legacy. The crowd reacted with louder applause than before. The power dynamic in the room shifted noticeably. Jimmy attempted one last strategic angle. He implied that Daly's stance felt like contrarian positioning, that sometimes disagreeing with the consensus keeps a name relevant. The comment hovered just on the edge of accusation. Daly did not hesitate. He calmly reminded the host that relevance built on opinion lasts longer than relevance built on reaction clips. He pointed out that he has spent years being labeled controversial, unpredictable, unfiltered, yet he remains authentic to his own perspective. He suggested that authenticity unsettles people who rely on controlled environments. The implication was sharp. Several audience members stood briefly to clap. Others sat stunned. Jimmy leaned back for the first time that night. The desk no longer looked like a barrier of authority. It looked like furniture. Daly then did something that fully tilted the exchange. He acknowledged TigerWoods' achievements openly, without hesitation. He spoke about influence, dominance, cultural impact. He made it clear that leaving him off a list does not erase respect. It simply reflects a personal ranking, shaped by different criteria, by separating respect from agreement. He dismantled the premise of the confrontation. The tension in the room softened slightly, not because it was resolved, but because the framing had been exposed. The argument was no longer about TigerWoods. It was about whether disagreement equals disrespect. Jimmy attempted a lighter tone, suggesting that perhaps the debate had gotten more intense than expected. Daly responded evenly that intensity comes from assumptions, not from opinions. The audience applauded again. Louder this time. The balance had shifted. For the first time since the Tiger topic surfaced, Jimmy did not have the upper hand. He did not have a joke cued. He did not have a narrative thread to pull. Daly had taken control without shouting, without insults, without theatrics, and the crowd could feel it. But the night was not over yet. The studio felt different now, not because the tension had vanished, but because the direction of it had changed. Jimmy understood that he had lost control of the framing. The attempt to corner Daly into appearing defensive had backfired. Instead of retreating, Daly had widened the lens and exposed the mechanics of the moment. The audience had seen it happen in real time. Jimmy shifted tactics. He leaned into vulnerability rather than confrontation. He acknowledged, without fully conceding, that late night thrives on debate. He admitted that the segment had been promoted heavily, that the controversy was part of why viewers tuned in. The honesty was subtle, but it mattered. Daly did not gloat. He did not press further. Instead, he redirected the conversation towards something larger. The culture of ranking athletes, as if their careers can be stacked like trading cards. He spoke about how media narratives turn legends into symbols, then turn those symbols into battlegrounds. He made it clear that leaving TigerWoods off a personal list did not mean denying his impact. It meant refusing to participate in the automatic consensus machine. The audience listened more quietly now. Not divided, not erupting, but engaged. Jimmy attempted one final challenge, suggesting that if Daly truly respected Tiger, perhaps the phrasing of his omission could have been more careful. It was not accusatory this time. It was probing. Daly answered calmly, explaining that careful phrasing rarely survives in a culture that feeds on outrage. He suggested that no matter how diplomatically he explained his reasoning, the headline would still reduce it to a snub. The room reacted with knowing laughter. The exchange had evolved. What began as a push for viral tension had become a conversation about narrative power. The embarrassment no longer hovered over Daly. It hovered over the attempt to manufacture drama, and then Daly delivered the moment that sealed it. He leaned forward and remarked that sometimes the most uncomfortable truth in a studio is not the opinion being challenged, but the realization that the challenge itself was predictable. He suggested that controversy is often pre-written before the guest even arrives. The crowd responded immediately. Not with chaos, but with respect. Jimmy paused. There was no clever comeback waiting, no quick pivot that could restore the earlier dominance. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the remark. For the first time that night, the host appeared reflective rather than reactive. The audience sensed the shift. The heat had transformed into something else, something almost instructive. The confrontation had not exploded into shouting. It had unfolded into exposure, and in that unfolding, Daly had not only defended his stance on TigerWoods, he had reframed the entire exchange. The studio felt different now, not because the tension had vanished, but because the direction of it had changed. Jimmy understood that he had lost control of the framing. The attempt to corner Daly into appearing defensive had backfired. Instead of retreating, Daly had widened the lens and exposed the mechanics of the moment. The audience had seen it happen in real time. Jimmy shifted tactics. He leaned into vulnerability rather than confrontation. He acknowledged, without fully conceding, that late night thrives on debate. He admitted that the segment had been promoted heavily, that the controversy was part of why viewers tuned in. The honesty was subtle, but it mattered. Daly did not gloat. He did not press further. Instead, he redirected the conversation toward something larger. The culture of ranking athletes as if their careers can be stacked like trading cards. He spoke about how media narratives turn legends into symbols, then turn those symbols into battlegrounds. He made it clear that leaving TigerWoods off a personal list did not mean denying his impact. It meant refusing to participate in the automatic consensus machine. The audience listened more quietly now, not divided, not erupting, but engaged. Jimmy attempted one final challenge, suggesting that if Daly truly respected Tiger, perhaps the phrasing of his omission could have been more careful. It was not accusatory this time. It was probing. Daly answered calmly, explaining that careful phrasing rarely survives in a culture that feeds on outrage. He suggested that no matter how diplomatically he explained his reasoning, the headline would still reduce it to a snub. The room reacted with knowing laughter. The exchange had evolved. What began as a push for viral tension had become a conversation about narrative power. The embarrassment no longer hovered over Daly. It hovered over the attempt to manufacture drama, and then Daly delivered the moment that sealed it. He leaned forward and remarked that sometimes the most uncomfortable truth in a studio is not the opinion being challenged, but the realization that the challenge itself was predictable. He suggested that controversy is often pre-written before the guest even arrives. The crowd responded immediately, not with chaos, but with respect. Jimmy paused. There was no clever comeback waiting, no quick pivot that could restore the earlier dominance. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the remark. For the first time that night, the host appeared reflective rather than reactive. The audience sensed the shift. The heat had transformed into something else, something almost instructive. The confrontation had not exploded into shouting. It had unfolded into exposure. And in that unfolding, Daly had not only defended his stance on TigerWoods, he had reframed the entire exchange.